My name is Peter Richardson, and I never imagined that asking my own daughter for a glass of water after heart surgery would end with her shouting in my face, "We are not your servants." That moment cut deeper than any scalpel the doctors used on me. I had given them this house, paid their bills, covered their debts, and trusted that love would come back when I needed it most. Instead, I was treated like an unwanted burden in the very home my late wife's sacrifice had provided. But what they didn't know was that I still held one card they had overlooked, and once I played it, everything would change. Before I begin, I want to ask you, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like mine. I had just come home from the hospital, the smell of antiseptic still clinging to my clothes, my chest stitched together with tape and trembling hope. I lowered myself into my old armchair, the same one I used to rock Haley to sleep in when she was a baby. My voice was weaker than I expected, but I thought it was still strong enough for a simple request. "Could you bring me a glass of water?" I asked. I never dreamed those words would spark the kind of betrayal that scars deeper than surgery. Haley turned in the kitchen doorway, her arms folded tight across her chest, the same posture she had used as a teenager when she thought I was being too strict. But now her eyes were colder, sharper. "We are not your servants." The sentence hit me harder than the surgeon's scalpel ever could. My body recoiled, but not from the incision, it was from realizing the little girl who once brought me dandelions from the yard was gone. I stared at her, searching for a hint of the child who used to wrap her arms around my neck after nightmares. Instead, she looked at me the way strangers on the street look at panhandlers, an inconvenience, not family. Beside her, Kyan sat sprawled on the couch, eyes glued to the television. He didn't even flinch at her words, just adjusted the remote in his hand like it was a crown, and he was king of the house. "Seriously?" I tried again, my voice breaking in places I couldn't control. "I just got home from the hospital." My chest I didn't finish. The words tangled in pain and disbelief. I thought she might soften, might hear the weakness behind my words. Instead, her lips curled into something closer to impatience than compassion. "The kitchen's right there. You've got legs, don't you?" I gripped the armrests and forced myself to stand. Pain shot across my chest, sharp and electric, like the stitches were threatening to burst apart. My vision blurred for a moment, the room tilting. I pressed a hand to my chest, remembering how the doctor said I had flatlined twice during surgery. Twice. My survival was supposed to be a miracle. To my daughter and her husband, it was apparently nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Don't hurt yourself, Dad?" Haley said, her tone laced with something that sounded like mock concern. "We don't need more work around here." Work. That's what caring for me was, to them a burden, not love, not family duty. Every memory of carrying Haley through childhood fevers, of sitting by her bed, through college heartbreaks, slammed into me all at once. And now, when I asked for a sip of water, I was a nuisance. I staggered toward the kitchen, each step dragging the truth closer to the surface. The glass of water I poured trembled in my hands, and when I drank it, it didn't taste like water at all. It tasted like betrayal, like bitterness, like the end of illusions. I lowered myself back into the chair, slowly, not just because of the pain in my chest, but because something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I saw my daughter and her husband not as family, but as people who believed they had the power to strip me of my dignity. They were wrong. I sat in that armchair, the glass heavy in my trembling hand, and wondered if this was what my life had come to, reduced to begging for scraps of kindness from the very people I had given everything to. My chest burned with more than surgical pain. It was the sting of humiliation. I had endured doctors cutting into my heart, but nothing cut deeper than my daughter's voice telling me I was a burden. I thought back to the long nights in the hospital, the steady beeps of machines, the whispers of nurses as they walked by my door. Twice they said my heart had stopped. Twice I had been pulled back from the edge. And the first face I wanted to see when I opened my eyes was Haley's. But she hadn't been there. Not once. I excused it, telling myself she was busy, telling myself her life had responsibilities. But now, standing in my own kitchen, pouring my own water while she watched me stagger like a wounded animal, I realized the truth. She hadn't stayed away because of busyness. She had stayed away because she didn't care. Behind me, the television blared, filling the silence where compassion should have been. Kyan laughed at some game show joke, a dry chuckle that felt like sandpaper across my skin. Without looking at me, he muttered, "You're acting like you're dying or something." It was just a little heart procedure. A little procedure. I nearly collapsed right there, not from the surgery, but from those words. My doctor had explained the risks, how close it had been, how my survival was not guaranteed. But my son-in-law, who had never once paid a hospital bill or driven me to an appointment, dismissed it as if I'd gone in for a tooth cleaning. My pulse raced, and I had to steady myself on the counter. I wanted to remind him that the car he drove, the one parked in my driveway, had been paid for with my savings when he lost his job last year. I wanted to remind him that the roof over his head, the very one echoing his cruel laughter, had been a gift from me and Sarah, my late wife, who had insisted we look after Haley. But the words stayed stuck in my throat. Instead, I swallowed the bitterness like the water in my glass and returned slowly to my chair. As I lowered myself down, Haley let out a sigh, the kind people use when they're stuck in traffic or waiting too long in a checkout line. "Next thing you know," she muttered, "he'll want us to cook his meals too." I froze. That was not frustration talking. That was contempt. Kyan chuckled again, dry and humorless. "Don't give him ideas." The glass in my hand shook. I didn't know if it was my weakened body or the fury coursing through me. For decades I had worked, saved, sacrificed. I had walked through fire to provide a safe life for my daughter. And now, in the twilight of my years, she and her husband saw me as nothing more than dead weight. But here is what they didn't know: I was not as powerless as they believed. My heart may have been stitched together with thread, but my resolve was forged in iron. That day, as the shadows grew long across the living room, I made a decision. I would not beg again. I would not accept their cruelty as the final chapter of my life. Something inside me whispered that they had already written me off. What they didn't realize was that I was about to start writing the ending myself. Night settled over the house, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Kyan's voice echoing in my head. It was just a little procedure. The words twisted inside me like a knife. My heart had stopped. Twice my life had hung by a thread, and he called it little. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Sarah, my late wife. She would have never let this happen. She would have told Haley to honor her father, to care for him the way he had cared for her. But Sarah was gone, and I was alone with two people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. The next morning, I woke to the sound of dishes clattering in the kitchen. My chest still ached, every breath reminding me that recovery was supposed to be slow. I shuffled into the living room, trying to be part of the household again, trying to show them I wasn't useless. "Good morning," I said quietly. Haley barely looked up from her phone. Kyan smirked. "Morning, old man." Feeling dramatic today, I ignored the jab. "Would you mind helping me with breakfast?" I asked. Haley rolled her eyes. "You're really going to milk this surgery for all it's worth, aren't you?" The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and heavy. I thought back to the countless mornings I had cooked her eggs before school, the lunches I had packed, the late-night meals I had made when she studied for exams. Food had always been love in our home. Now asking for a slice of toast was seen as manipulation. I moved to the counter, determined to do it myself. My hands shook as I spread butter across bread, the knife clinking against the plate. Pain flared through my chest, but I kept going. If they thought I was going to beg, they were wrong. "Careful," there Haley said without looking up. "Don't cut yourself. We don't need more work to deal with." More work, the phrase repeated in my mind until it became unbearable. I wasn't work. I was her father. I had been the one to teach her how to ride a bike, the one to walk her down the aisle at her wedding. And now I was a chore. I sat at the table forcing down dry toast that tasted like sawdust. Across from me, they ate takeout from the night before, laughing together like nothing was wrong. The distance between us wasn't just emotional, it was a canyon I could never cross. And yet beneath the sting of humiliation, something else was taking shape. A quiet fire. I remembered the paperwork from 5 years ago, the day I transferred the house into Haley's name. My lawyer, Michael O'Connor, had insisted on certain clauses I hadn't cared about then, because I trusted my daughter. But now those words came back to me like a lifeline: conditional gift, reversionary rights, failure of care. At the time I thought they were legal jargon. Now they felt like destiny. I pushed my plate aside and stood, ignoring the sharp pull in my chest. They thought I was weak. They thought I was finished. But they were wrong. I wasn't just recovering from surgery. I was gathering strength for something much greater than survival. That afternoon, the sun slanted through the blinds, striping the living room with shadows. I sat in my chair, the same chair I had lowered myself into the day before, when the stitches screamed against my chest, and thought about how far things had fallen. A home should be a refuge, a place where family lifts you up when you are weak. Instead, mine had become a stage for contempt. Kyan stretched across the couch like a king surveying his kingdom, the remote control his scepter. Haley lounged beside him, scrolling through her phone, her lips pursed in that permanent expression of annoyance she reserved for me. They didn't even notice when I stood and walked toward the hallway. To them, I was invisible until I asked for something. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, the weight of the day pressing down like a stone. This room had been Sarah's and mine. It was where we had dreamed about the future, where we had whispered our plans late into the night. Now it felt more like a cell. On the dresser sat the photo of Sarah, smiling in the garden sunlight, catching the edges of her hair. I whispered, "You'd know what to do, Sarah." But the truth was, she already had. 5 years ago, after her funeral, I'd taken the life insurance money and bought this house. I thought giving it to Haley would be the ultimate expression of love, a way of carrying out Sarah's last wish for our family to stay secure. I signed those papers with shaking hands, never imagining I'd one day regret it. Yet I remembered the lawyer's steady voice, his insistence on safeguards. "These are standard clauses," Michael had said. "They ensure you're protected if circumstances change." I hadn't cared then. But now those words were carved into my memory like scripture. I pulled open the nightstand drawer, searching for the old leather address book I still kept stubborn against the digital age. My fingers trembled as I flipped through names until I found it, Michael O'Connor. I traced the ink of his number, remembering his firm handshake, his no-nonsense advice. If anyone could help me reclaim my life, it was him. I sat on the edge of the bed, dialing the number with deliberate slowness. My chest throbbed with every beat, a reminder of my fragile condition, but my voice was steady. When Michael answered, I apologized for the hour, then explained. "It's urgent," I said. Family matter. His tone was calm, professional, just as I remembered. I'll come by tomorrow morning, Mr. Richardson. We'll review everything. I hung up and let the phone rest on the quilt Sarah had sewn years ago. For the first time since stepping through the door of this house after surgery, I felt something close to hope. They thought I was broken. They thought I had no choice but to endure their cruelty. But I had choices, legal, powerful choices, and tomorrow I would begin to use them. I woke before dawn, the house still wrapped in silence. For a moment I lay in bed, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the old clock in the hallway. My chest ached as I sat up, but it wasn't just the stitches pulling it, was the weight of what I knew I had to do. Yesterday, I was humiliated. Today, I would start reclaiming my dignity. I dressed slowly, buttoning a clean shirt over the tender scar that ran down my chest. In the mirror, my reflection looked older than I remembered, thinner, grayer, carved by exhaustion. But behind my eyes there was something new, something I hadn't seen in a long time resolve. At 8 o'clock, sharp, a knock came at the door. I moved carefully down the hallway, each step deliberate, and opened it to find Michael O'Connor standing there with his familiar leather briefcase. He looked the same as always, calm, professional, his gray suit crisp even on a Saturday morning. "Mr. Richardson," he said warmly, "let's sit and go over everything." We settled into the living room, Michael across from me, spreading out papers across the coffee table. He retrieved the deed tax records and the documents I had signed 5 years ago. My hands shook slightly as I handed over the folder I had kept locked away. "I need to know what my options are," I told him. Michael adjusted his glasses and studied the deed transfer carefully. After several minutes, he tapped a paragraph with his finger. "Here," he said, "this is the key." The transfer was structured as a conditional gift. That means ownership reverts to you if your daughter fails to uphold her obligations. My heart thumped harder. Obligations like what he met my eyes. Basic care, housing, respectful treatment. If those conditions are violated, the property can be legally returned to you. 30 days' notice is all that's required. The words hit me like a surge of oxygen. For days I had felt trapped, powerless. Now I saw a path forward written in legal ink years earlier, waiting for me to claim it. Michael leaned back in his chair. "The law won't solve every hurt, Mr. Richardson, but it will give you leverage. The question is, do you want to act now or gather more evidence first?" I thought of Haley's dismissive tone, of Kayan's laughter, of the way they had looked at me like I was nothing more than a chore. I thought of Sarah, whose sacrifice had built this home. "I'll act," I said quietly, but with more strength than I had felt in years. Michael closed his briefcase with a firm snap. "Then let's prepare the paperwork. We'll do this properly." After he left, I sat alone in the living room, sunlight warming the floor at my feet. For the first time since my surgery, the water in my glass didn't taste bitter. It tasted like resolve. They thought they had broken me. But I had just begun to fight. Sunday morning carried a different weight. The air in the house was the same, coffee brewing in the kitchen, the sound of Haley humming absently as she unpacked shopping bags. But I was no longer the same man who had staggered through the door after surgery. My lawyer's words echoed in my head. "Legally, it may still be yours." That single sentence had shifted the ground beneath my feet. I watched them move around the living room as if they owned it. Haley setting a new lamp on the table, Kayan flipping through the television channels like a lord surveying his domain. To them, the house was theirs by right. To me, it had become a battlefield, and I was done playing the role of the defeated. When Haley glanced at me, her eyes narrowed slightly. "You're quiet this morning," she said, suspicion threading through her tone. I smiled faintly. just thinking. She raised an eyebrow. About what I leaned back in the chair, my hand resting against the bandages across my chest. About family, about what it means to take care of one another. My words were calm, but the look on her face told me she didn't like where this was going. Kyan snorted without looking away from the screen. Don't start with the guilt trips again. We've already done plenty. Plenty. The word burned, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I decided to test them to gather one more piece of evidence. Haley, I said gently, since you're in the kitchen, could you bring me a glass of water? The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the canned laughter from the television. Her body stiffened, her head turning toward me slowly. Can't you get it yourself? She asked, her voice flat. I'm still recovering from surgery, I reminded her, keeping my tone even. It would help. Kyan looked up from his phone, irritation flashing in his eyes. You walked to the kitchen just fine yesterday. Don't act like you're helpless. I nodded slowly, as though their responses didn't sting like acid. Inside, though, I felt the pieces falling into place. Every word they spoke, every sneer, every refusal, they were building my case for me. I wasn't just an old man with hurt feelings. I was a property owner gathering proof of breach. Enough of the drama, Haley said, tossing a shopping bag onto the floor. You can't expect us to wait on you hand and foot just because you had a medical procedure. There it was again, that contempt, sharper, now bolder. I let the silence stretch, staring at them, as though memorizing every line of their faces. Because in a way, I was. These words, these actions would be written into the next chapter of their lives, a chapter they didn't see coming. I rose slowly, my body still fragile, but my voice firm. I see, I said quietly. So asking for help from my family is unreasonable. Yes, Haley said without hesitation. We're not your personal servants. Her words, cold and final, sealed more than my humiliation. They sealed their fate. I stood there in the living room, the weight of Haley's words pressing down on me like a stone on my chest. We're not your personal servants. She said it so casually, so firmly, as if the years of sacrifice I had poured into her life meant nothing. The same daughter, whose every fever I had soothed, whose every dream I had funded, now looked at me as if I were some stranger demanding too much. I could feel my stitches tugging as I breathed in, but the ache inside was sharper than anything my surgeon had warned me about. I steadied myself on the chair, let the silence hang just long enough for them to believe they had won the moment, and then I spoke. If compassion is too heavy for you, I'll lighten the load. Kyan muted the television, his eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? I lowered myself back into the armchair, deliberately refusing to let them see weakness. It means I won't ask again. Not for water, not for food, not for care. You've made yourselves clear. Haley frowned, unease flickering across her face. She had always been quick to anger, but slow to recognize when she'd crossed a line. Dad, don't be dramatic. You're recovering, I should, what? I interrupted, my voice sharper than it had been in years. Pretend your cruelty is kindness. Pretend this roof doesn't rest on the shoulders of your mother's sacrifice and my years of labor. Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no answer. Kyan stood, setting the remote down with a thud. His tone carried a mock authority that barely concealed his fear. Look, you're upset. You need rest. Let's not turn this into something bigger than it is. But it was already bigger. Much bigger. They thought they were managing me, but what they didn't realize was that I was taking careful notes, mental records of every insult, every refusal. Each one would serve me later, not in an argument, but in a courtroom if it came to that. I folded my hands in my lap, the picture of calm. I'll make this simple. You both need to leave my house. The air snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Haley gasped, color draining from her face. What did you just say? This is my home, I said evenly. And I want you out of it. Pack your things. Kyan's laugh was short, bitter. You can't be serious? This house is ours. You gave it to Haley. You don't just get to change your mind. I met his gaze without flinching. You're right. I don't get to change my mind, but I do get to enforce the conditions you've already broken. For the first time, I saw it, the flicker of fear behind his bravado. Haley's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the couch. She knew me well enough to recognize the tone in my voice. I wasn't bluffing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. With every second, the balance of power shifted, and they both knew it. The silence after my words stretched thin, taut, like the string of a bow about to snap. Haley's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Kyan, however, didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his posture stiff, trying to tower over me the way a bully looms over a smaller child. You think you can just kick us out? He barked. This is our home. You can't do that, old man. I didn't flinch. It's my home, I replied quietly, the calmness in my voice unsettling even to me. I gave it as a gift with conditions. You broke those conditions the moment you treated me like a burden instead of family. Haley shook her head furiously. That's not fair. We've taken care of you. Taken care of me, I cut her off. By leaving me to stumble across the room for a glass of water. By mocking me when I could barely breathe. By locking me in my own bedroom. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. She hadn't expected me to say it out loud. Hadn't expected me to call the cruelty what it was. Kyan moved closer, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. You're confused. You're not thinking clearly after that surgery. You're lucky we even let you stay here. Those words, let you stay here, were all I needed to hear. They believed this house was theirs, believed they were the ones granting me permission. But I knew the truth, and soon they would too. I don't need your permission to live in my own house, I said, firmly standing, even though my chest protested with every movement. I spoke to my lawyer this morning. The deed still protects me. And you have 30 days to leave. Haley gasped, the sound sharp as glass breaking. You called a lawyer. I did, I said, and I'll call him again. This time it won't be a warning, it'll be a notice. Her hands flew to her mouth. She looked at Kyan, but he only snarled, stepping closer, trying to corner me. You're bluffing. You don't have the strength to fight us. You're weak. You're old. No judge is going to take you seriously. For a moment I felt the weight of my frailty pressing down my heart, still tender, my body fragile. But then I remembered Sarah and the promise I had made to her when she was slipping away, that I would protect this family even if it meant protecting them from themselves. I straightened as much as my body allowed and locked eyes with him. Try me. The challenge hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Haley grabbed his arm, her voice frantic now. Kyan, stop, please. We can talk about this. But the fear in her tone told me she already knew the truth. The ground beneath them had shifted, and there was no going back. Kyan's eyes narrowed, and I could see the storm building behind them. He wasn't used to me pushing back. For years he had lived off my generosity, wearing my money like armor, walking through this house as though he had built it brick by brick. But now that I had stripped away the illusion, his anger had nowhere to hide. Enough of this nonsense? He snapped, his voice rising to fill the room. You're not throwing us out. You're confused, and you're going to sit down before you hurt yourself. Haley stepped between us, her voice trembling with desperation. "Dad, please don't make this worse. You're still recovering, you're not thinking straight." It wasn't concern, I heard it was fear. Fear that the house she believed was hers might slip through her fingers. Fear that her safety net was unraveling. I stood my ground. "I've never been clearer," I said. "This house is mine, and I will not be treated like a stranger inside it." Kyan's face darkened. He lunged forward and snatched the phone from my shirt pocket before I could react. "You won't be calling that lawyer again," he hissed. My chest tightened, not just from the sudden movement, but from the realization of what he was doing. They weren't just ignoring me now. They were actively stripping away my means to fight back. Haley grabbed my arm, her grip firm, guiding me toward the hallway. "Come on, Dad," she said, her voice coated in false gentleness. "You need to rest. Let's get you back to your room." "I'm not going anywhere," I growled, but my body betrayed me. The stitches pulled, my legs wobbled, and the pain shot through my chest like lightning. I couldn't resist both of them, not in this condition. Together they steered me into my bedroom. Haley on one side, Kyan on the other. My sanctuary with Sarah had become a prison. The door closed behind me with a hard thud, and then came the sound that sealed my humiliation, the click of the lock from the outside. I pressed my palm against the wood, my heart pounding faster than it should. "You can't do this," I said, my voice low but steady. From the other side of the door, Kyan laughed. "We just did. You'll stay in there until you calm down and stop talking crazy." Their footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving me alone in the silence. I turned and looked at Sarah's photograph on the dresser. Her smile felt like both a comfort and a challenge. I whispered, "I won't let them win." I tried the handle again, but it held firm. The window was my only other option, but 15 feet down onto concrete wasn't survivable in my condition. My pulse quickened, but then I heard something, a voice drifting through the evening air. My neighbor Joshua Palmer was in his backyard, coiling up a garden hose. I moved to the window, opened it just enough, and called out with all the strength my lungs could muster. "Joshua, help me." Joshua's head snapped up at the sound of my voice. For a second, confusion flickered across his face, but when he spotted me leaning out of the upstairs window, his expression hardened into concern. He dropped the hose immediately and hurried toward the fence. "Peter, what's going on? They locked me in my bedroom." I called down, my voice strained from the effort. "They took my phone. I need you to call the police." He blinked, stunned. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "I've just had heart surgery and they're using it to control me. Please, Joshua, call now." He didn't hesitate after that. Pulling his cell phone from his pocket, he dialed. I could hear the dispatcher's voice faintly through the open line. Joshua repeated my address, explained the situation, and added, "He's an elderly man recovering from major surgery. His daughter and son-in-law have locked him in his room." The words sounded surreal, but they were true. Relief washed over me as Joshua looked back up. "Officers are on their way. 8 to 10 minutes, they said." "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight. I stayed by the window, gripping the sill for balance, listening to the faint hum of voices downstairs. Haley and Kyan were talking, though I couldn't make out the words. I suspected they believed they had finally shut me down, that their lock had silenced me. They were wrong. Minutes stretched like hours. My chest throbbed each beat, reminding me how fragile my body still was. But my mind was clear, sharper than it had been in years. They had crossed a line, and now the law would see it. "Police are here." Joshua called, his voice carrying a note of reassurance. I leaned farther out, straining to see the cruiser pulling up to the curb. Blue and red lights flickered against the houses of Maple Street. At that moment, footsteps thundered up the hallway. The lock clicked, and Haley opened the door, her face painted with a mask of concern so polished it could have won her an award. "Dad, are you okay?" You seemed agitated. Behind her, Kyan added with feigned confusion, "Why are the police here?" I stepped past her into the hallway, my voice steady, because I asked them to come. Seconds later, the doorbell rang. Haley rushed forward, taking my arm as though guiding a fragile man to safety. Her grip was tight, calculated. She opened the door to reveal two officers, one male, one female, both wearing the weary professionalism of people accustomed to domestic disputes. "Good evening," the male officer said. "We received a call about a family dispute." "There must be some mistake," Haley said sweetly. "We're just having a quiet evening. My father recently had surgery, so we've been very careful with him." I looked the officers in the eyes, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. "Officers, my daughter and her husband locked me in my bedroom and confiscated my phone when I told them to leave my house." The room went still. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across Haley's face. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was no longer the man they thought they could silence. The moment the words left my mouth, they locked me in my bedroom. Haley's hand flew to her chest, as though I had struck her. "Dad," she gasped, her voice quivering with a perfect imitation of wounded innocence. "That's not what happened at all." Her eyes glistened, her lip trembled, and if I hadn't known better, I might have believed her. She turned toward the officers, playing her part with conviction. "My father's been very confused since his surgery last week. The anesthesia, the pain medication, it's been affecting him. We've been doing everything we can to care for him, but he keeps imagining things." Kyan nodded, stepping forward with the solemnity of a man pretending to shoulder a burden. "He thought the bedroom door was locked, but it just sticks sometimes. We would never lock him in. We've been following the doctor's advice, encouraging him to walk around, build his strength. He doesn't always remember it that way." The officers exchanged a glance, the kind that carried years of experience in separating truth from fiction. But the problem was clear. They saw an elderly man still bearing surgical scars and two younger composed caretakers who appeared to be doing their best. "Sir," the female officer asked gently. "When did you have your surgery?" "Monday," I answered firmly. "And I am not confused. They took my phone. They locked me in that room." Haley let out a soft cry, covering her face with her hands. "He's been saying things like this all day. It breaks my heart." Kyan rested a hand on her shoulder, his voice low, steady, rehearsed. "We love him. We've opened our home to him. But sometimes he lashes out, says things that aren't true." The officers looked around the living room. Everything appeared ordinary. No broken furniture, no signs of a struggle. On the coffee table lay the neatly stacked shopping bags from earlier, as though the household had been enjoying a quiet evening. To an outsider, it looked like I was the one disrupting peace. I reached for my pocket, but it was empty. Kyan produced my phone with a smooth motion, handing it to the officer. He must have left it on the counter. We were charging it for him. The lie slid so easily off his tongue that my stomach twisted. The male officer handed the phone back to me, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Richardson, are you taking any medication right now?" "Yes," I admitted. "But it doesn't change the truth. They locked me in that room. They told me I was a burden. They laughed while I could barely walk across this floor." Haley stepped forward, her tears falling freely now. "Dad, please," she whispered, her tone a masterstroke of guilt and shame. "You're not yourself. We just want to help you." The female officer scribbled in her notebook. "Mr. Richardson, do you feel safe here tonight?" I looked at Haley's wet cheeks, at Kyan's steady mask of concern, and I realized their performance wasn't for me. It was for the law. And worse, they were winning. The officer's question hung in the air. Do you feel safe here tonight? It should have been simple. I should have said no, explained how my own daughter and her husband had turned my home into a prison. But as I looked at the two officers, I saw doubt already clouding their eyes. They were watching an old man with a healing scar across his chest, listening to a daughter who cried on cue, and a son-in-law who spoke with the calm authority of a caretaker. I straightened my back, ignoring the ache in my ribs. No, I don't feel safe, I said firmly. They locked me in my bedroom and confiscated my phone when I demanded they leave. That's not care, that's control. Haley let out another sharp sob, collapsing into the nearest chair, as though the weight of my words had crushed her. Dad, how can you say that? She whispered, her voice ragged. After everything we've done to make you comfortable, Kyan's jaw tightened, but his words came smooth, practiced. You see what I mean? Officers, he's paranoid. He's been accusing us of terrible things. It's the medication talking. He's mixing up what actually happened. The male officer frowned and jotted notes. Mr. Richardson, have you noticed any disorientation? Confusion about time or place? I know exactly where I am, I shot back. This is my house. My wife's life insurance bought it. I gave it to them on the promise I'd always have a home here. And they've broken that promise. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw the female officer hesitate, her pen pausing mid-stroke. But then Haley lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice breaking just enough to pierce the room. He keeps saying it's his house, but it's in my name. He doesn't understand. He thinks we're stealing from him. She turned her pleading eyes toward the officers. I love my dad, but he's not the same since the surgery. We're scared he's going to hurt himself if we don't watch him. The female officer's expression softened. I understand. Sometimes recovery can be difficult for everyone involved. I felt the ground shift under my feet, the narrative slipping away like sand through my fingers. They were rewriting reality, and the law was listening. Mr. Richardson, the male officer, said carefully, we're not seeing evidence of a crime here. Family disputes after major medical events can be complicated. If you're unhappy with living arrangements, you can always seek mediation, but... No, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. This isn't a disagreement. This is abuse. They're treating me like a prisoner in my own home. Haley covered her face, shoulders shaking with practiced sobs. Kyan placed a steadying hand on her back, playing the role of the concerned husband. We'll do better, he promised the officers. We just want him to feel safe. The officers glanced at each other, then back at me. And in their silence, I heard the verdict. They believed them more than me. The minutes dragged on as the officers continued their questions, but it was clear which way the wind was blowing. Every time I tried to explain, Haley countered with trembling words about confusion. Every accusation I leveled, Kyan smoothed over with a calm explanation about my fragile state. Finally, the male officer closed his notebook. Mr. Richardson, he said evenly, we don't see evidence of a crime here. It seems like there may be some misunderstandings related to your recovery. The female officer added gently, if you feel unsafe, you can always call us again. But right now, our recommendation is that you all try to work through this as a family. Healing is hard for everyone. And with that, they left. The cruiser rolled quietly down Maple Street, its taillights glowing like fading embers. The silence in the house afterward was unbearable. Haley stood near the door, her tears drying instantly, her face shifting back into something far colder. Kyan shut the door with deliberate calm, then turned toward me. His eyes were hard, his lips curled into a sneer. That he said, his voice low and venomous, was a very stupid thing to do. Haley's mask of grief vanished. Her voice was sharp, now stripped of its sweetness. Do you have any idea how insane you sounded? Do you know how easily they could have taken you away for evaluation? I stared at them both, my pulse quickening. You lied. You convinced them I was confused. Kyan stepped closer, his presence menacing. We convinced them of the truth that matters. And now you'll stop this nonsense before you make things worse for yourself. Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and held up my phone. This stays with me until you start thinking clearly. Haley moved beside him, her arms crossed tightly. We'll take your documents too. Can't have you making wild decisions. The realization sank in like a stone in water. They weren't just silencing me in the eyes of the police. They were preparing to strip me of every tool I had left. My phone, my papers, my voice. Kyan leaned in, his tone mocking. You thought you could scare us with your lawyer. You're not going to ruin what we've built here. This house is ours. You're lucky we let you stay in it. My body trembled, not from fear alone, but from the physical strain of holding myself upright against the ache in my chest. I wanted to shout, to fight, to prove that I wasn't as powerless as they believed. But one glance at the locked bedroom door reminded me they were willing to confine me again, and the police had already been convinced once. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Rage would get me nowhere. I needed strategy. I needed patience. Haley's voice cut through my thoughts, cold and final. This is your last warning, Dad. Don't ever try something like that again. But in my heart, the decision was already made. Their warning wasn't the end, it was the spark. They thought the police visit had ended the matter. They believed their lies had sealed my fate as a confused old man. But as the house fell into its evening rhythm, Haley flipping through a magazine, Kyan chuckling at the television, I knew I couldn't afford to wait. Every hour that passed gave them more control. And if I let them keep my phone and my documents, I might never reclaim my life. Locked in my room once again, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at Sarah's photograph. Her smile, forever captured in a summer's light, seemed to urge me forward. Don't let them bury you alive, I whispered. I tested the door again, rattling the handle, but the lock held. My eyes turned to the window. 15 feet down onto concrete, an impossible drop for a man fresh from heart surgery. But to the side, just below the frame, was the flower bed Sarah had once tended with such care. The soil would be softer, the bushes could break some of the fall. My body screamed no, but my spirit knew there was no other choice. I opened the window as quietly as I could, wincing at the groan of the frame. Swinging my legs over the sill was like dragging lead weights. Pain lanced through my chest, sharp enough to make me see stars, but I gritted my teeth and pushed forward. For a moment I balanced there, perched like a burglar in my own house. Then I let go. The landing rattled every bone in my body. The soil cushioned me some, but my knees buckled, and I collapsed in the flower bed, gasping. I lay there motionless, listening for footsteps, but none came. The television still droned from inside. They hadn't heard. Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself up, brushing dirt from my clothes. Every movement reminded me of the stitches in my chest, the fragility of my body. But weakness would have to wait. I circled around to the back of the house, avoiding the gravel path that would crunch underfoot. The garage light flickered on as Kyan went to fetch a drink from the fridge, but I kept low, hugging the shadows. When he disappeared again, I slipped through the side door. Inside, the house felt different, no longer their fortress, but a battlefield where stealth would decide the outcome. I crept down the hall, past the living room where Haley laughed at some shallow reality show, and into my bedroom. My goal wasn't confrontation. Not yet. It was retrieval. On the dresser lay my leather address book, Michael's card tucked inside. In the drawer beneath it, the deed copies and insurance papers I had guarded for years. My hands trembled as I gathered them, not from fear, but from triumph. I had what I needed. Clutching the documents close, I returned to the window. The night air felt like freedom against my face. As I lowered myself down for the second time, pain rippled through me, but this time it was joined by something else: satisfaction. They thought they had me trapped, but now I held the key to their undoing. The night passed in fragments, shallow, dozing, sudden jolts of pain, the steady awareness that I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. By dawn, I was dressed and ready, my documents tucked carefully into a worn briefcase. My body ached from the fall, every muscle protesting, but my mind had never been clearer. At precisely 8 o'clock, I arrived at Michael O'Connor's office. He must have seen the strain on my face because he poured me a cup of coffee before asking a single question. "You look like you've been through a war, Peter," he said gently. "In a way I have," I replied, sliding the papers across his desk. "And I need you to help me finish it." He opened the folder, scanning the documents with a practiced eye. His brow furrowed when he reached the deed. "You've been right all along. The reversionary clauses are airtight. If they've failed to provide care or shown hostility, you can revoke the gift." I leaned forward. "They locked me in my own bedroom. They lied to the police saying I was confused from surgery. They've mocked me, dismissed me, treated me as though I'm nothing more than a burden." Michael's jaw tightened, the pen in his hand, pressing so hard against the paper it nearly tore. "Then we're not talking about hypotheticals anymore. We're talking about action." For the next hour he explained the process, his voice steady, his confidence unshakable. "We'll prepare a formal notice of revocation," he said, pulling up legal templates on his computer. "It will state clearly that their treatment constitutes material breach of the gift conditions. Once served, they'll have 72 hours to vacate or we proceed with eviction." I listened, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the realization that I was no longer powerless. Every cruel word Haley and Kyan had thrown at me was now evidence. Every dismissive laugh, every refusal, every lock turned on a door was fuel for the fire I was about to unleash. Michael paused, his eyes meeting mine. "Peter, this won't just be a legal battle. It will be personal." "Are you ready for that?" I thought of Sarah, of the promises we had whispered in this very home. I thought of the night I nearly died on an operating table, and how instead of gratitude I was met with scorn. My voice was steady when I answered, "I've never been more ready." Michael printed the draft notice, the bold header stark against the crisp paper. He slid it across the desk for me to read. "Notice of gift revocation." The words leapt off the page, solid and undeniable. "This is just the beginning," Michael said. "Tomorrow we'll have it served officially. By this time next week, you'll have your house back." I held the document in my hands, the weight of it heavier than any insult Haley had hurled at me. For the first time in days, my heart felt steady. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. And justice was finally mine to claim. Monday morning sunlight spilled across the living room as I sat in my armchair, a sealed envelope resting heavily in my hand. The words, "Notice of gift revocation," seemed to radiate through the paper like heat. This wasn't just a document, it was the culmination of every insult, every sneer, every moment of cruelty I had endured. Today, the balance of power would shift. Haley wandered into the kitchen, humming as though nothing in the world had changed. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air, bitter and sweet all at once. A few moments later, Kyan strolled into the dining room, scrolling through his phone, muttering about bills that needed paying. I studied them both carefully. They were comfortable, secure, utterly convinced that my threats were nothing but the ramblings of an old man. I cleared my throat, letting my voice carry across the room. Haley, Kyan, I need you both to sit down. Haley turned, annoyance flickering across her face. What is it now, Dad? We're busy. Sit, I said firmly, my tone sharper than they had heard in years. Something in my voice made her pause. Slowly, she and Kyan joined me in the living room, their expressions a mixture of irritation and unease. I held up the envelope, the official letterhead visible. These are eviction notices. You have 72 hours to remove yourselves and your belongings from my property. The room froze. Haley's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. Kyan's phone slipped from his hand and landed silently on the rug. What are you talking about? Haley demanded, her voice shrill with disbelief. I spoke to my lawyer, I said calmly, unfolding the papers so they could see. This house was a conditional gift. You broke those conditions the moment you mocked me, dismissed me, and locked me in my own bedroom. As of now, ownership reverts to me. You have 72 hours to leave. Kyan stood abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. You can't do this. This is our home, no. I corrected him, rising slowly from my chair despite the ache in my chest. This is my home. I built it. I paid for it. And I gave it to you on the promise that I would always be cared for here. You spat on that promise, and now the law is on my side. Haley's face went pale, her voice trembling. Dad, you don't mean this. We can change. We'll do better. I shook my head. It's too late for empty promises. The countdown starts now. The tick of the clock on the wall suddenly seemed louder, filling the silence with finality. I placed the documents on the coffee table, the words between us, like a chasm they couldn't cross. For the first time, they looked at me not as a weak old man, but as someone holding the one thing they couldn't manipulate: the law. Haley sat frozen, her knuckles white as she clutched the edge of the couch. Kyan paced the room like a caged animal, muttering under his breath about rights and fairness. I watched them both, letting the silence grow heavy before I spoke again. You keep calling this your home, I said, my voice calm but deliberate. But do you even know how this house came to be ours? Haley blinked, confused. You told me it was from your savings, from years of your contracting work. That's only part of the truth, I replied. I stood, moving carefully toward the hallway, and returned with a manila folder I had kept hidden for years. I laid it flat on the coffee table and slowly opened it, exposing documents they had never seen: insurance forms, beneficiary statements, a death certificate. Haley leaned forward, her eyes scanning the pages, her face drained of color. What? What is this? This, I said quietly, is your mother's life insurance. $350,000, paid out after her funeral. It was Sarah's last act of love, her final gift to this family. She wanted security for you, for us. She wanted a home where we would take care of each other. Haley's lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at the documents again, disbelief etched into every line of her face. I continued, my tone steady but heavy with emotion. I used that money as the down payment on this house. My savings paid the rest. Every brick, every window, every shingle above our heads, it was bought with her sacrifice. And I gave it to you, Haley, not because I had to, but because I wanted you to feel safe. I wanted you to have a foundation to build your family. Kyan stepped forward, anger flickering behind his eyes, though his voice faltered. Why didn't you tell us this before? Because I didn't want you to feel the weight of it, I said. I wanted you to see this home as a gift from a father who loved you, not as something purchased by tragedy. I thought if I carried that burden alone, you could live free of it. Haley's hands trembled as she touched the paperwork, tears brimming in her eyes. "Mom's money," she whispered. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "Your mother believed this house would keep us together, that it would be a place of love. And instead you turned it into a place where your father was mocked, dismissed, and locked away. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what you've done?" Haley covered her mouth with her hands, tears spilling freely now. Kyan looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I gathered the documents back into the folder and tapped it shut. "You didn't just dishonor me. You dishonored Sarah. You dishonored the very sacrifice that made this home possible." The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time, I saw true fear and shame in their eyes. Not because of the law, because of the truth. Haley sat slumped on the couch, her hands clutching the insurance papers, as though the ink itself might burn her skin. Her sobs were not the polished tears she had shown the police. These were raw, uneven, unguarded. "Dad," she whispered through trembling lips. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Kyan stood nearby, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his confidence shaken. His eyes darted between me and the folder on the table, the reality of Sarah's sacrifice stripping him of his usual bravado. "Look," he muttered, his tone strained. We handled things badly, but that doesn't mean we don't care about you. We can fix this. We'll do better." I shook my head slowly. "You had your chance to do better. When I came home from the hospital, weak and vulnerable, all I asked for was a glass of water. Instead, I was mocked, dismissed, treated like I was less than human. That moment wasn't a mistake, it was the truth of how you see me." Haley's tears flowed harder. She dropped the papers, pressing her palms against her face. "Please, Dad, don't do this. We'll change. We'll take care of you. Just give us another chance." Her words twisted at my heart, but I kept my voice steady. Second chances don't erase cruelty. They don't bring back respect once it's been shattered. This house was meant to be a sanctuary, not a prison. And you turned it into a place of contempt. Kyan took a step closer, his voice low, almost pleading now. "Where are we supposed to go? Rent is impossible these days. We'll be ruined." That I said, meeting his eyes firmly, is not my burden anymore. I carried you both for years, your car payments, your failed business, your debts. And instead of gratitude, I received scorn. My generosity has limits, and you've reached them. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, filling the silence with its unyielding rhythm. I placed the folder back into the envelope and tapped it once on the table for emphasis. 72 hours. That's all you have. Pack your things and go." Haley collapsed against the arm of the couch, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Dad, please," she begged, her voice muffled. "I can't believe Mom's gift. Her sacrifice. I can't believe we dishonored her like this. I didn't mean." I cut her off gently but firmly. "Meaning well doesn't erase the damage. Your mother wanted this house to be a place of love. Instead, you turned it into a place where her husband was humiliated. She would be heartbroken." Kyan ran a hand through his hair, frustration and panic mixing in his features. "You're really going to throw us out, your own daughter?" I stood steady despite the ache in my chest and picked up the envelope. "No, Kyan." She threw herself out the moment she chose contempt over compassion. "The law just gives me the words to make it final." The room fell into silence, broken only by Haley's sobs and the steady tick of the clock counting down the hours they had left. The next 48 hours unfolded in a blur of boxes, tape, and silence. Haley and Kyan moved through the house like ghosts, their usual chatter replaced with hushed arguments and hurried footsteps. The arrogance that once filled every corner of these rooms had evaporated, replaced by the heavy air of inevitability. I sat in my recliner watching them pack. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. For years, I had been the one carrying them through bills, crises, and mistakes. Now, for the first time, they carried the weight of their own decisions. Haley paused in the hallway, a suitcase in her hand. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. She glanced at me as though searching for mercy, but I offered none. Mercy had been squandered when she let contempt take the place of compassion. She turned away quickly, retreating upstairs to gather more clothes. Kian avoided me altogether. He kept his head down, stacking boxes near the door, his jaw tight, his eyes averted. Each slam of the tape gun was a reminder that his kingdom was crumbling. The man who once strutted across my living room now shuffled through it like a tenant overdue on rent. On the coffee table lay the house keys still attached to the silver Home Sweet Home keychain Haley had bought when I signed the deed over to her. The irony of it made my chest tighten. Sweet home indeed, until they turned it bitter. Late Tuesday evening, Haley approached me, the keys dangling from her trembling hand. Her voice cracked. "Dad, I know we don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know. I understand now. I see what we did." I looked at her, really looked at her. My daughter, the girl I once carried on my shoulders at the fair, the woman whose wedding I had paid for, the mother I hoped she might become. I wanted to feel pity, but all I felt was the deep ache of betrayal. "Understanding is the first step," I said evenly, "but consequences don't vanish just because you regret them." Tears slid down her cheeks as she placed the keys into my palm. They were warm from her hand, heavier than they had ever felt before. I closed my fingers around them, my voice quiet but unyielding. They always belonged to me. Haley bowed her head, unable to meet my gaze. Kian appeared in the doorway, car keys jingling in his fist. "The car's loaded," he muttered, his tone stripped of all its former arrogance. She nodded and turned toward him. For a moment she glanced back at me, her eyes pleading, searching for one final reprieve. But I gave her none. The front door opened, and for the first time in years, I felt the air inside the house shift, lighter, freer. The sound of their footsteps faded into the night, leaving me alone with my home, my memories, and the keys that had always been mine. Thursday afternoon arrived with the sound of tape ripping and furniture sliding across hardwood floors. The 72 hours were nearly over, and the house felt less like a home and more like a transit station. Boxes lined the entryway, each one filled with the remnants of a life they had built on my generosity. I sat quietly in my recliner, the eviction notice still on the coffee table, its bold lettering visible to anyone who cared to look. The words weren't just legal, they were a line in the sand. Haley and Kian had crossed it, and now they were paying the price. Haley descended the stairs, slowly carrying the last of her bags. Her eyes were swollen, her steps heavy. She placed the suitcase by the door and looked at me with a mixture of shame and sorrow. "That's everything," she said softly. Kian entered behind her, lugging a box with both arms. He avoided my gaze as he set it down, then straightened and cleared his throat. "We're ready." His voice carried no arrogance, now only exhaustion. On the coffee table, the keys lay waiting. Haley picked them up, holding them for a long moment, her fingers trembling. She looked at me as though the weight of the small silver keychain might crush her. Finally, she extended her hand. "These belong to you." I accepted them without a word. They felt warm, familiar, and right in my palm. "They always did," I said. Her lips quivered, and for a moment I thought she might collapse into sobs again. Instead, she nodded and turned toward the door. Kayan followed his head, bowed, his shoulders slumped. Together they stepped outside, their footsteps fading across the porch. The front door closed with a soft click, final and absolute. Silence spread through the house, a silence that no longer felt oppressive but comforting, like a long-lost friend returning at last. I looked down at the keys in my hand, then at the manila folder still on the table. Sarah's insurance documents lay inside her handwriting on the old policy forms. I whispered, "We did it, Sarah. They can't take this from us anymore." I rose slowly, my chest aching but my spirit light. Walking through each room, I felt the walls breathe again, free of contempt and bitterness. This was no longer their house of entitlement. It was once again my home, my sanctuary, my promise kept to Sarah. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace, not the shallow peace of avoidance, but the deep, steady peace of justice. Revenge hadn't restored me. Truth had. Boundaries had. I paused in the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank slowly. It no longer tasted bitter. It tasted clean, pure, like ownership, like dignity, like freedom. The house was mine again. And so was my life. As I sit here now in the quiet of a house that finally feels like home again, I can't help but reflect on everything that has happened. What hurt the most wasn't the pain of surgery or the scars across my chest. It was realizing that the people I loved most thought so little of me. Being treated like a burden in the very place I built with my own hands was a wound no doctor could heal. But I learned something vital: generosity without boundaries becomes an invitation for entitlement. Love must be matched with respect, or it curdles into contempt. By reclaiming my home, I wasn't just taking back bricks and mortar, I was reclaiming dignity, the one thing no one should ever have to beg for. If you're a parent, I urge you to think about the example you set. And if you're an adult child, remember that your parents' sacrifices deserve honor, not dismissal. Sarah's sacrifice bought this house, but respect was meant to keep it standing. Have you ever lived through something similar? Have you faced betrayal from the very people who should have stood by you? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you handled it and what you learned. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share it. And remember, respect is the foundation of every true home. Thank you for listening.